Hello and welcome to the shop and another episode of Shit Gets Fixed. And I'd like to remind you that here at Shit Gets Fixed, we use your likes, subscribes, and eyeball times to offset the financial burden for people fighting cancer. It's so easy and doesn't cost you anything to make a difference. In fact, you're doing it right now. So if you hate cancer as much as I do, subscribe to our channel. There's more information about how and why we do this at the nonprofit website shitgetsfixed.org. Alrighty, let's get after the shit we need to fix. And the shit we need to fix is on our long-term project, the stunning 1914 Excelsior single. It's been a while since we've worked on the old 1914, so I put together a video montage of the work we've completed to this point, kind of get everybody up to speed. So without further ado, let's roll the tape. So we are going to get after fabricating the new axles or center shafts for our pedals. And I kind of got ahead of my machining montage skis on this a little and already finished the, let's call them blanks. And you can see they're both slightly different. That's because the right side pedal was replaced at some point. Although they are both Torrington brand pedals, original to the Excelsior, the short one, the one here on the right side, is a woman's or junior's pedal. And since motorcycles were marketed to men back then, I would assume that the original right side pedal was swapped out at some point with a junior or woman's pedal. And back then, you did what you needed to do to keep this stuff running. I mean, a man's got to ride, blow off some steam after a long day at work at the slaughterhouse, rendering living things into industrial adhesives and lamp oil and other whiz-bang stuff for a mere 35 cents an hour, right? Right. So, first things first, let's put this feature onto our new shafts. These are flats for a wrench to fit onto, a 5/8 wrench to be exact, so we can tighten our pedals to the pedal crank assembly. Let's head over to the vertical subtractive manufacturing department and make some chips. We now need to put the threads at both ends of our new pedal axles, and the larger threads on the inboard side of the axles, the end that threads into the pedal crank assembly or crank arm, this part, are somewhat interesting. As some of you know, the left side pedal has a less common left-handed or reverse thread at that end, and the right side pedal has a more common right-handed thread. So the right side pedal is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, and the left side pedal is lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. Anyway, we put that less common left-handed thread on the left side pedal to counteract a phenomenon called mechanical procession. Mechanical procession occurs when rotational forces interact with things that are threaded together, like in our case, the crank arm and our pedal axles. At first glance, this design seems counterintuitive. And to prove this at first glance counterintuitiveness, I've come up with a demonstration. Let's go take a look. We have a bicycle crank assembly and some axles to some pedals assembled into this makeshift model. I'm going to hold on to the pedal axles and pedal like we normally would. Now, the left side pedal has that special left-handed thread on it, and the right side pedal has the more common right-handed thread. And this is the way bicycles have been designed for a very, very long time. All right, I'm going to start pedaling. Let's see what happens. WTF! Did we just prove over 100 years of bicycling design and manufacturing wrong? No, we did not. In a real-world environment with heavy loads and torque applied, all this pedaling business translates into a rolling force. And this rolling force moves in the opposite direction of rotation. Let me show you a very simplified, non-exact example so we can visually see kind of what I'm talking about. So we have two circles, and the smaller one fits inside the larger one. I'm going to move the smaller circle around the inside of the larger circle in a counterclockwise direction. And as I do that, you can see that the smaller circle rotates in the opposite direction. So I'm moving the smaller circle counterclockwise, but it's rotating clockwise. And if I reverse direction, it rotates counterclockwise. Now, before all you Neil deGrasse Tyson genius types start space blasting the comment section with your lasers, that was not a demonstration of mechanical procession. But I think it offers a pathway for our brain waves to start to understand how it might all possibly work. So, because of this crazy mechanical procession thing, we choose that right side righty-tighty and left side lefty-tighty thread. So when we pedal along, our pedals will actually tighten themselves into the threads of the crank arm. And yes, this is all mind-blowing indeed. In fact, it's so mind-blowing, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Oops. And if all that wasn't mind-blowing enough, we're going to cut these threads, including that special left-handed one, by a method called single-point thread cutting. And we use our lathe here to do that. What is single-point thread cutting, you ask? Well, I figure what better way to answer that question than to offer up a single-point thread cutting explainer. This explainer is going to just glance off the surface of the dark underworld of threads and single-point thread cutting. But I will try to explain the basics, the essentials. So hopefully when we are done, we will have a general understanding of this process. All right, let's get after it. So, as in its title, single-point thread cutting is a machining process performed on a lathe that uses a single point cutting tool to create a helical groove or threads onto a rotating workpiece. The big trick in this process is to carefully control the longitudinal movement of that tooling as it relates to the rotational movement of that workpiece. Now, we still need to move our tooling transversely, but I feel the longitudinal aspect is most important because of some things I will briefly touch on later. Now, this is all kind of a mouthful, so let's break it down into some smaller parts. In general, when performing subtractive manufacturing work on a lathe, we clamp our workpiece into a chuck, and the chuck rotates our workpiece. We change the shape of that workpiece by removing material from it as we move our tooling around both in the longitudinal and transverse directions. We can move our tooling around by using our turning handles or have our lathe help us by using a gearbox and engaging a thing called power feed and/or a half nut system. Simply speaking, this gearbox, power feed, and half nut system is a way to transfer power mechanically from our rotating chuck all the way over to here to make our tooling move. And that half nut system is the longitudinal move-don't move switch during the single point thread cutting process. Now let's talk about moving our tooling around that rotating workpiece a little more specifically. We need to accurately control the movement of our tooling so we remove the right amount of material in the right place. Our goal in single point thread cutting as it relates to longitudinal movement is to create the correct thread pitch. And in our case, that's expressed in threads per inch or TPI. So, the larger threads we want to cut on our new pedal axles are 1/2 by 20, and the 20 is the number of threads per inch. So, our workpiece needs to rotate 20 times, and our cutting tool needs to move longitudinally 1 inch. And we accomplish this through the use of that gearbox and half nut system I mentioned earlier. To demonstrate this longitudinal movement of our tooling as it relates to the rotation of the workpiece, I've installed a large cardboard tube into the lathe, and it represents our workpiece. To represent our cutting tool, I've made this special spring-loaded Sharpie marker tool holder. The Sharpie marker will leave a line on our cardboard tube that will represent our helical groove or threads. I have also put a piece of red tape on the chuck so we can better see its rotational speed, and another piece over here where our Sharpie marker tooling lives so we can better see its longitudinal movement. I have the gearbox set to cut 10 threads per inch. Alrighty, here we go. Rightio, let's inspect our work. Oh yeah, that looks like 10 threads per inch to me. Nice. Ooh, that is a sweet jam. So the tricky part in doing all this longitudinal movement during the single point thread cutting process is consistency. You see, we need to take several passes to complete our final thread form, and it is absolutely critical that we keep the longitudinal movement of our tooling in perfect sequence with our rotating workpiece during each of those passes. This is of the utmost importance, so the point of our tooling is always cutting the same groove in the same spot as the time before. So we always work from one direction, never back and forth, to take up the backlash in our gearbox. We also use a special thing called a thread dial to let us know when to engage our half nut system. And you remember, the half nut system is the longitudinal move-don't move switch. Anyway, if we don't employ these tricks to keep our tooling in sequence with our workpiece, our threads won't have the form or shape we want them to. Now on to the transverse movement side of things. We need to control not only how far in total we move our tooling transversely, but because we take those several passes to create our final thread form, we also control how far we move our tooling in transversely on each of those passes. And we do that with our turning handles. You see, every thread size, both fractional and metric, have a desired major and minor diameter. And we need to have the peaks and valleys of our threads fall within those desired diameters so we get a proper fit and expected mechanical properties. And we achieve this primarily through the transverse movement of our tooling. Now, there is so much more to know about threads and single point thread cutting. In fact, in the Machinery's Handbook, the Bible for machinists, there is an entire section dedicated to threads and thread cutting. And in my old 25th edition, that section is 286 pages deep. And the density of information on those pages is nothing short of overwhelming. Well, I guess that's your not so deep dive explainer into single point thread cutting.
That is a sweet jam.
Oh, actually, that's for the other one. So while you were off getting explainered, I got some work done and finished cutting the new threads on our pedal axles. Drove to the ball bearing supply store, purchased a bunch of 5/32 ball bearings, drove back to the shop, and assembled our pedals with our new axles and ball bearings. And this is the part where I always say, job done. I also wanted to mention that if you happen to actually personally know Mr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you could extend my invitation to him to come on the program and further explain mechanical procession, that would be great, because even after all that stuff from earlier, I still don't quite understand it. Tell him all of this is for a good cause, and his appearance would certainly help with our mission to monetize this channel's content and give all that money to people who are fighting cancer. Anyway, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. But nevertheless, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
That is a sweet jam.